The day she rolled her suitcase across our hardwood floor, the house learned her name before I did. I was slicing lemons at the kitchen island, 2 for iced tea, 1 for the salmon marinade, when Daniel called from the foyer. "Eve, we've got a guest for a couple of weeks." The wheels clicked over the threshold, the way a sentence clicks into place just before it ruins you. She stepped in wearing a cream sweater, hair tied in a neat low bun, and a soft perfume that smelled like white lilies after rain. She smiled at me, careful, almost apologetic. "This is Lauren," Daniel said, not quite meeting my eyes. "She's family." Family. It's a word people use when they want you to stop asking questions. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and offered a welcome that felt more like a reflex than a choice. "I'm Evelyn. Come on in." At that time, our life was ordinary, in the kind of way you don't question until it disappears. We lived in a lilac-trim colonial at the end of a cul-de-sac, a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside Chicago. I taught art at the community center 3 days a week. Daniel ran a small contracting business, which meant there were always Home Depot receipts on the console table and a tape measure in our junk drawer that never stayed shut. We had Sunday dinners with our next-door neighbor, Claire, who brought over lemon squares and town gossip in equal portions. We had a dog, Scout, who slept wherever the sunlight did. We had a calendar on the fridge dotted with PTA meetings, dentist appointments, and a weekend we kept promising each other we would spend by the lake, and never did. You learn a lot about trust by how quietly you move through a life you believe in. I made up the guest room, tucked fresh sheets into hospital corners, and set a glass carafe of water on the nightstand the way my mother taught me. Lauren thanked me with a small nod, eyes flicking past me towards Daniel as if for permission. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dinner was roast chicken, buttered corn, and a salad that always tasted better when the tomatoes were ugly. We ate in that gentle early evening light that makes a house look kinder than it is. Daniel poured wine for us and sparkling water for Lauren. When I asked how they were related, he said, "It's complicated," and changed the subject to the contractor who'd messed up an estimate. Complicated. The word hung in the air like a light you forget to turn off. Over the next few days, small things began to arrange themselves into a pattern I pretended not to see. Lauren knew where we kept the olive oil without asking. She reached for the right cabinet on the first try, opened the pantry, and found the sea salt like she'd done it 100 times. She liked her coffee black, like Daniel. She laughed at a joke I'd never heard, but apparently belonged to an earlier room they both had lived in. She wore a thin silver band on her left hand. Not a diamond, not flashy, just a slender ring with a tiny nick in the metal, as if it had been worn enough to have a memory. I told myself it was a coincidence. Rings are rings. People wear them. When Daniel's phone lit up face down on the island, I didn't look. When he stepped onto the back deck to take a call in a voice kinder than the one he used with telemarketers, I told myself he was settling invoices, smoothing a vendor's temper, doing all the things a man does when he's trying to keep his small business from swallowing him. On Thursday, I found a receipt from a boutique hotel downtown in the pocket of Daniel's navy jacket, the one he wears when he wants to seem like he tried. It was dated 2 months ago, a single night, champagne listed under room service in that neat serif font that makes even sin look tasteful. I held the paper between my 2 fingers, like it might stain me. I didn't ask him about it that night. Instead, I made bolognese and watched as Lauren grated Parmesan the way I grate it, over the pot, not the plate, so it melts into the sauce like a secret. She moved around my kitchen with a familiarity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was like watching a stranger recite a poem you wrote. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said, unprompted, wiping her hands, eyes shining. "It's been a lot." A lot. It's amazing how many feelings you can pack into 2 syllables when you're not ready to pick one. Daniel kissed my temple when I passed him a bowl. He smelled like sawdust and cedar, like he always does, And that smell alone nearly forgave him for something I hadn't even named yet. I slept badly. The house creaked differently, as if a new weight had shifted the joists. At 2:07 a.m., I heard soft footsteps in the hallway, the kind that try not to be heard. At 2:12, a door clicked shut. In the morning, the guest towels were damp and the lavender soap had moved to the far side of the dish. Friday afternoon, Claire waved at me from her yard, watering a row of hydrangeas she babies like children. "New tenant?" she called. "Just visiting," I said. She has a way of humming that means she knows more than she's saying. "I saw Dan's truck out late the other week. You guys doing okay?" She said it lightly, but her eyes stayed on my face the way women look at each other when they're trying to pass a lifeline without making a scene. "We're fine," I said, too quickly. That night, Daniel took Scout for a walk and didn't ask if I wanted to come. When he returned, Lauren was on the couch with a throw blanket over her knees, watching a baking show we used to laugh about. He sat on the other end, not touching her, not looking at me. There are silences that build bridges, and there are silences that burn them. Saturday morning, a package arrived by USPS, one of those padded envelopes that purr when you press them. The label read, "Lauren Hayes," with our address printed cleanly beneath. I set it on the console table, waited for her to claim it. She didn't. "Do you want me to open it?" I asked at lunch, trying to sound like a person who has nothing to worry about. She hesitated. "Sure." Inside lay a slim folder and a small velvet ring box. My throat tightened. I flipped open the folder. It wasn't jewelry paperwork like I expected. It was a copy of a marriage certificate. I don't remember the first breath I took after I saw Daniel's name, Daniel Arthur Hayes, paired with Lauren Marie Carter, dated 19 months ago in a county 2 states away. There was a pastor's signature, there were witnesses, there was everything you need to make a life legal enough to ruin someone else's. The room swam a little, the way it does when you stand up too fast. I closed the folder, set it down with hands that weren't mine. The ring box sat beside it like a period at the end of a sentence I didn't want to read. I didn't open it. "You should ask Daniel," Lauren whispered. Voice lined with something that might have been shame, might have been relief. "He said he would tell you." I believed the part about said. Men are fluent in intentions. I waited until evening. The light thinned over the cul-de-sac, kids squealed on scooters, someone grilled 3 houses down, and the smell of char and pepper threaded through our open windows. In the kitchen, I set 3 plates on the counter and then put one back in the cabinet because appetite is a thing that needs a place to sit. When Daniel came in, I held up the folder. "What is this?" He didn't ask what I meant. His face went the color of copy paper. He glanced at Lauren and then at me, as if choosing which cliff to step from. "It's not what you think." People always say that when they have nothing left to take from you but your intelligence. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice level, in the way that makes a glass not shake when you set it down. He ran a hand through his hair, the way he does when he's measuring something he doesn't want to pay for. This was supposed to be temporary. We had a ceremony, but, Evelyn, it wasn't meant to be like this." "Like what?" I asked. "Legal?" He shut his eyes for a second. A long blink, like maybe if he kept them closed, the life he liked reopened when he wanted it. I was going to explain. I needed the right time. "The right time," I repeated, and suddenly the calendar on our fridge felt like a witness. Lauren stood very still, fingers pressed to the hem of her sweater. "I shouldn't have come," she said softly. "He said—" Daniel cut in, sharp. "Lauren." The way he said her name told me everything he'd ever whispered and everything he never planned to. I set the folder on the counter like evidence in a trial. "I brought your other wife into my home," I said. The words precise, each one found and polished before I let it go.
He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I thought, he started, but thinking is the first thing a man will blame when he's done doing. I looked at Lauren then. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who had believed a story like I had, just a different chapter. Her face crumpled with grief that didn't excuse anything, but made it human. "Dinner's getting cold," I said, because sometimes the most dignified thing you can do in a house on fire is serve the meal you made. We ate in a quiet that tasted like metal. Scout settled under the table by my feet as if he knew where the hurt had fallen. Daniel picked at his food. Lauren didn't touch hers. After we cleared the plates, I walked to the guest room I'd made so carefully. The bed was perfect, the water still in its carafe, a book on the nightstand that hadn't been opened past page 11. I stood there a long time, then opened the closet. On the top shelf was a small shoebox, the kind you keep when you think you'll return the boots, but you never do. Inside, I found a stack of Polaroids, the kind that print warm and crooked. Daniel and Lauren in front of a small chapel, cheeks flushed from cold and choices. Her ring, a slender, familiar band, gleamed against his palm like a promise he'd sold twice.
When I returned to the kitchen, the night had folded itself tight. Daniel was at the sink, rinsing plates he'd never learned to wash properly. Lauren stood by the back door, hand on the knob, as if the right apology might unlock a better ending. "Tomorrow," I said, voice low but steady, "we're going to talk about what happens next. In my house, with my lawyer on speaker if I need to, and with the truth sitting between us where everyone can see it." I wasn't calm. I was something sharper. Daniel nodded, eyes on the faucet. Okay, I said, and turned off the kitchen light, letting the dark hold what we weren't ready to. I slept in the guest room that night, on the bed I'd made for her. The sheets were cool and smelled faintly of lilies. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling fan carve the dark into quarters, a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard spoke. Scout settled, a refrigerator hum rose and fell. Ordinary sounds, domestic things, the kind of details that used to make me feel safe, until they don't. The next morning, the house smelled like coffee and denial. Daniel was already in the kitchen, standing by the espresso machine he never learned to use properly. Lauren was beside him, sleeves rolled up, quietly whisking eggs like she belonged there. My mug, the one with the faded E printed in gold, was in front of her. "Morning," I said, voice flat but civil, the kind of tone that holds back everything it's not ready to say. Daniel glanced at me with that careful look, like a man trying to measure how much of the bridge still stands before stepping on it. "Morning," he replied softly. "We should talk." Lauren froze, the whisk pausing mid-air. I sat down at the island, deliberately slow. "Then talk." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then tried a gentler route. "It started during the contract's trip to Missouri. Remember when the storms hit and I couldn't get back for a week? That's when I met her." Lauren lowered her eyes. I could see her knuckles whitening around the bowl. "It wasn't supposed to turn into anything," Daniel went on, voice trembling slightly. "She just lost her mother. We talked. Things happened. And when she found out she was pregnant, Pregnant?" The word landed like glass shattering on tile. He winced. "She miscarried. It was early, but her family, very traditional, insisted I marry her. I thought I could keep both lives separate until I figured it out." "You figured it out by putting her in my guest room?" He had no answer for that. Lauren spoke up suddenly, voice shaking. "He told me you knew, that you'd agreed to coexist. He said you were okay with it, as long as I didn't interfere." I stared at her. "You told her that?" Her face crumbled. "I swear, I didn't know. I thought—" "You thought wrong," I said.
my voice barely above a whisper. Silence filled the kitchen. The fridge hummed, the clock on the wall clicked from 8:59 to 9 a.m. with the sort of precision that made my skin crawl. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over our backyard. The swing set Daniel had built last summer, the one that had tilted slightly after the first storm, but he never fixed. It struck me then how symbolic that was. Something beautiful, but uneven, left just crooked enough to feel wrong once you noticed. "I need both of you to leave," I said, quietly, turning back to them. "Today." Lauren gasped. "But where?" "Anywhere," I said. "I don't care where. But not here. Not under my roof." Daniel took a step forward. "Eve, please. Don't call me that. You don't get to use nicknames in the ruins you made." He stopped. For the first time in years, I saw real fear in his face. Not fear of losing me, but fear of exposure. The kind of fear men have when they realize their lies have lost their roof. He tried again, softer. "We can figure something out. I'll stay at a motel, just until—" "No," I said. "You'll both go. Together. Because whatever you built it as a pair. So end it that way too." Lauren started crying quietly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know he—" I walked past her, opened the front door, and pointed towards the driveway. "You should go before I forget I'm civilized." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Daniel sighed heavily, set down his coffee mug, and grabbed his keys. He didn't look at me again. Lauren followed, wiping her tears, her wheelchairs clicking against the floorboards like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence that never made sense. When the door shut, the quiet was deafening. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the stale air that used to feel like home. Then, slowly, I walked to the kitchen, picked up the mug she'd used, and dropped it into the trash. The first night alone, I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I was empty. The house felt too large, too aware. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the soft whine of the AC vent, the ticking clock on the mantel. Ordinary sounds. Domestic things. The kind of details that used to make me feel safe. Until they don't. Claire from next door saw me sitting there. She crossed over barefoot, carrying her sweater over her arm. "You okay, sweetheart?" I smiled faintly. Define okay.
She sat beside me without asking, the way good friends do when they sense words might break you. "I saw the car leave," she said quietly. "2 of them. That all I need to know?" "That's all," I whispered. She nodded, didn't press. We sat there in silence until the mosquitoes found us. Days blurred into each other. I spent mornings cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, afternoons at the community center teaching kids how to shade light over glass jars, and evenings walking scout around the block just to feel the air move. It took me a week to open the shoebox again, the one with the Polaroids. I sat on the living room floor, spread them out like evidence in a trial I'd already won, but never wanted. In one photo, Daniel and Lauren stood in front of a small chapel, smiling like people who hadn't yet met their consequences. In another, her hand rested on his chest. That same ring. I took a deep breath, collected them, and placed them into a manila envelope. On it, I wrote his name. Just his name, and mailed it to his office with no note. By the second week, the gossip had reached town. Claire told me people were whispering at the farmer's market about the contractor who had 2 wives. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them fill the silence with their versions. Mine was already heavy enough. But one morning, a letter arrived addressed to me in Daniel's handwriting. It wasn't long, just 1 page. He wrote that Lauren had left him, that she'd gone back to Missouri, that he couldn't find the words to explain how he'd let it all happen. At the end, he wrote, "If you ever decide you can forgive me,
I'll be waiting. Not expecting, just waiting. I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. Not as a keepsake, but as proof that I had survived something unspeakable and stayed standing. That night, I sat by the window again, lights dim, the smell of rain seeping through the screens. And for the first time in weeks, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. The world hadn't ended. It had just rearranged itself. It's strange how scandal dies, slowly, quietly, like a storm that runs out of rain but leaves behind the smell of thunder. By the end of that month, the whispers had softened. The neighbors went back to their lawns, their bake sales, their polite waves. Life, as it always does, pretended to forget. But I didn't. There's a particular kind of silence that comes after betrayal. It isn't peace. It's reconstruction. It's the sound of bricks being rearranged in your soul to build something that can hold you again. That summer, I decided to repaint the house. The cream walls that Daniel had chosen suddenly felt dishonest, too clean, too curated. I picked a color called Ashwood Mist, soft gray with a hint of blue. It looked like rain clouds right before they break. Claire came over to help. She said, "Therapy through paint," rolling color along the wall with strong, even strokes. Men underestimate the things women can rebuild when they have nothing left to lose. I smiled at that. They underestimate everything that doesn't make noise. By August, the house didn't look like ours anymore. It looked like mine. I changed the locks. I boxed up the last of Daniel's tools, left them on the porch with a note that said, "Please collect before the weekend." He did, quietly, one afternoon while I was at work. When I came home, the box was gone, but on the doormat, he'd left a small white envelope. Inside was Scout's tag, the one when we first got him, engraved with "The Hayes Family, 7 Maple Grove." He didn't leave a note this time. Maybe he finally understood that some words don't heal. They only bruise in slower motion.
He'd had a mild heart attack, they said. He'd be fine, but he needed someone to sign discharge papers. Lauren hadn't been reachable. When I walked into the hospital room, the air smelled like antiseptic and resignation. Daniel looked older, thinner. His face had lost the easy color of a man who thought consequences were for other people. "Eve," he murmured when he saw me, "you didn't have to come." "I know, but I did." He smiled faintly. "You look different. Repainting will do that." We didn't talk much. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd lost and everything we'd earned from losing it. Before I left, he said softly, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find something that makes you happy." "I already did," I said. "It's called peace." Back home, I poured myself tea and sat by the window, watching dusk fall over Maple Grove. The houses glowed warm and soft in the distance. Somewhere, a kid's laughter echoed, followed by the bark of a dog. Ordinary sounds, the kind that rebuild you one heartbeat at a time. Claire came by later with a pie she swore was accidentally perfect. She placed it on my counter, took one look at my face, and said, "Closure? Something like it." We shared quiet bites of apple and cinnamon, both pretending not to notice how the house no longer echoed. "You know," she said, licking her fork clean, "people keep saying you handled it with grace." "Grace?" I laughed softly. "I just handled it with silence. Sometimes they look the same." She nodded, eyes soft. "Still, that's rare. Most people would have burned it all down." Maybe I did, just quietly. That fall, I started a new project at the community center called Second Skin. Each piece was made from torn canvas and fabric scraps, painted over and stitched back together into something whole again. At the opening night,
People stood in front of the pieces for long moments, whispering things like, beautifully broken, and you can feel the story inside it. One woman approached me afterwards and said, "You make pain look survivable." I smiled. That's the only way I know how to use it. Winter arrived with its own kind of honesty, clean, cold, and quiet. On Christmas Eve, a small card arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Dear Evelyn, I know I was never the victim, but I wanted you to know I left him months ago. You were right. I built my life on a lie I didn't ask enough questions about. I hope one day I can rebuild mine the way you did yours. Minus Lauren.
I folded the card and placed it inside my journal, next to Daniel's letter. Two ghosts of the same mistake, resting side by side like old newspaper clippings. I made a cup of cocoa, turned on the small Christmas tree lights, and sat with Scout curled against my feet. The house was still. Not empty, just still. I realized then that peace doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, like a guest who knocks softly, takes off her shoes at the door, and makes herself at home without needing to be asked. When spring came, I finally took down the swing set. The wood had started to rot anyway, but it felt symbolic to remove it myself. I left the patch of bare ground alone for a while and planted lavender there instead. It grew fast, wild, fragrant, like forgiveness that doesn't need permission. Sometimes I'd catch neighbors glancing at the patch when they walked by, probably wondering why someone would plant lavender where children used to play. But I didn't owe anyone the story. A year later, I changed my last name. Not back to my maiden one, and not to something new. I just removed his. I became Evelyn Hart. When the clerk handed me the new ID, she smiled and said, "New chapter?" I nodded. No, just a cleaner ending. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch again, and thought about all the women who never get to tell their stories. The ones who find out too late, who stay because they're afraid, who leave but still carry the ache like an echo. I whispered into the quiet air, "You deserve better." Maybe I was talking to them. Maybe I was talking to the version of myself who'd once believed in forever. Either way, the wind carried it softly across the streetlights and into the dark where truths go to rest. They say every house has a heartbeat. Mine used to race. Now it just breathes. When people hear my story, they always ask the same question: how did you stay so calm? And I tell them the truth. I wasn't calm. I was shattered. But I learned something about silence. It's not the absence of anger. It's the space where strength grows roots. I used to think forgiveness was something you gave to the person who hurt you. Now I know sometimes forgiveness is just setting the weight down so you can walk again. If you asked me what I would say to Lauren today, I'd tell you this: you were never my enemy. You were my mirror, showing me the parts of myself that still believed love meant endurance instead of respect. And to Daniel, there's nothing left to say. Some people teach you how to love. Others teach you how not to. Both lessons are sacred. I still live in the same house. The walls don't whisper secrets anymore. They hold memories quietly, like old friends who've promised not to bring up the past. Sometimes, when I water the lavender by the porch, I think about how strange life is, how betrayal and healing can grow in the same soil if you just stop pulling at the roots. So if you're listening to this, maybe you've been lied to or left behind or made to feel small inside your own life, I want you to remember you don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to destroy to rebuild. And you don't have to be loved by someone else to deserve peace. Because peace isn't found in apologies or in closure or in someone finally saying they're sorry. Peace is the moment you stop waiting for any of that. Would you have let them stay?
Or would you have opened the door and set yourself free the way I did? Tell me in the comments. And if my story found you tonight, hold it gently, not as a tragedy, but as proof that even the quietest woman can rise from the loudest heartbreak and still speak softly. Thank you for listening. This was Evelyn Hart's story, told in my own voice, one heartbeat at a time. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, you're not alone. Subscribe, share, and tell me, what would you have done?